I'm super pumped you guys are here tonight. We are wrapping up our series all about comparison, which is the thief of what? Everything. It's the thief of what? Everything. All right. Just making sure you're awake, right? Comparison is, in fact, the thief of everything. The reality is, most of us, when we give into the temptation to fall into the trap of comparison, what we do is we take our eyes, kind of just like that song just sang, we take our eyes off the prize, eyes off of what God has for our lives, eyes off of the truth, and start instead comparing where we stand with what everybody else is doing. The problem is we're all flawed, we all have mistakes in our lives, we all have things that we can't measure up with in our own lives, so why would we think that looking to other people would give us a better answer? But I want you to think about a question right now. Who is somebody that you look up to in life, or maybe that you looked up to when you were younger? Maybe this was a professional athlete, a pop star, or singer, musician, somebody in your field of expertise, somebody that you look up to, whether maybe that's a YouTuber, maybe that's an actor, maybe that's somebody that to some degree or another you've idolized in your life, right? For me, that person was Jon Foreman, the lead singer of Switchfoot, right? For those of you who don't know me very well, Switchfoot is indeed my favorite band. We took a trip to Ozark Christian College last weekend, and what did I have blaring in the car like 90% of the time? Yeah, all three people who were there are like, Switchfoot. I listen to a lot of Switchfoot. I like Switchfoot. Anybody never heard of Switchfoot? Gosh, you guys need to go look up Switchfoot on Spotify and listen to them because they're amazing. So anyway, I remember looking up to Jon Foreman. He's come out with solo stuff too that's very acoustic and folky kind of driven. But they're a rock band, a Christian rock band, and you may recognize their song "Meant to Live," which was one of their big ones, or "Dare You to Move." It's got like that, and it's like got the speaker bounce, and it's super awesome and epic. Corbin's looking it up on the computer right now while I stall and try to describe it to you because I didn't warn him ahead of time. So now he's scrambling, and everybody give it up for Corbin. All right, this is some Switchfoot right here. Ready? That's Switchfoot. I've seen them live more times than I care to admit. And let me just tell you, when I was your age, I idolized them. Their album Hello Hurricane had just come out. It was their first album that came out on their own independent record that they built their own studio for. I think it was the best rock and roll album of that decade, and maybe many more. But that's my personal biased opinion. I love me some Switchfoot. And so I idolized Jon Foreman. I remember in your shoes thinking, I'm going to go to John Brown University in Arkansas. I'm from Joplin, Missouri. Okay, so this was cool. And I wanted to get a degree in business marketing and a minor in audio engineering so that I could audio engineer myself and then have the business know-how to market myself, and I was going to make it as a rock star, an independent rock star outside the system, like a real rocker. And then I went into youth ministry instead. So that's where I ended up. But no, in all seriousness, I remember looking up and thinking, that's what I want to do with my life. I remember sitting in a Switchfoot concert, standing in a Switchfoot concert at one point, and thinking like, my life will never be complete unless I'm up on a stage leading a bunch of people, thousands of people in rock and roll someday. Well, God had different plans, obviously, because I'm not Jon Foreman. I don't have the voice for it. I don't have the guitar playing skills for it. Every time I'd practice with the album, I had a guitar amp that I could plug my CD player into and then also play with. So I was like, I can rock with it. And then I'd watch them live and then do stuff that is not on the album. Like, nope, I can't do it. So I remember when I kind of had to let those dreams die. But the reality is we all look up to different people in our own lives. And so at what point does it cross the line from looking up to somebody and somebody you want to be like to it becoming a direct comparison to your own life, right? I looked at Jon Foreman and I thought, I'm never going to live up to that, right? And nor should I, because there's only one Jon Foreman. But then the more grounded example was when I was a freshman and I was on the basketball team. There's this guy named Caleb Hutchcraft that played, and he was probably to this day the best high school basketball player I've ever seen. He was like when we'd scrimmage together in practice, there's the freshman team versus the other teams, and so I was point guard, but he was also point guard, and I would dribble it down. They wouldn't do the full court press, but as soon as I crossed the half court line, stole it down to the other end, made a layup. I kid you not, like 10 times within like a 45-second period, because I just could not like maintain control of the ball against his defense. But then when it came to him being on offense, he was by me and dribbling in circles around me before I could even get to him. And so I remember thinking at that time, man, not only is he a phenomenal basketball player on the court, but off the court, he was like the nicest guy. He's like, you got it, Zach. You just keep up the good work, you know? And it seemed patronizing at first, but until you got to know him off the court, and he was genuinely a kind person. The kind of people that make you mad about how nice they are, right? That just make everybody around them feel great. I remember more directly to Caleb Hutchcraft thinking, I'm never going to be like that. I'm not as nice as him, and I'm not as talented as him. So I'm never going to be able to be the next Caleb Hutchcraft. And I remember feeling down on myself about it, because I was like, I see my potential in my mind, like my mind's eye, where like I'm this version of myself that's like 20 times better than my current version. Do you guys have that? And I remember looking at Caleb and thinking, that's who I want to be. And I'm never going to be that. The problem is, it's good to look up to somebody, to aspire to look up to them like a role model, but it's never okay to look up to somebody and compare your life directly to theirs. Because the reality is everybody else has different life experiences that brought them to where they are. They have different natural abilities, different work ethics, different things that's gone on in their lives that's gotten them to the point where they're at, and that path is most often different from your own. So it's not a fair comparison. All right, the problem is when we move on from idolizing somebody to directly comparing, when we compare ourselves, our lives to them, because the more we look at them, the worse we tend to feel about ourselves, which is true in my case. I'm suspecting, since you're all human, that this has been true in your case too. The more you look at somebody else, the worse you feel about yourself, because you realize you're never going to be that person. And good, because God has different plans for you than that person. It's a different path for you to walk than what that person's on. But whenever we look and as soon as we compare a part of our lives to a part of somebody else's life, we suddenly feel like we're not enough, right? We're not cool enough, not smart enough, not talented enough, not attractive enough, not rich enough, not funny enough, right? We look around at the people around us and we think, we compare ourselves to them. And this is what we've been talking about for the last several weeks. It's the struggle to feel like we are never going to be enough when we're looking around. We're looking at the horizon when we should be looking up to the heavens. This is our issue. We're caught up in comparison, and it's not that like to aspire to be better than you are is a bad thing. It's a good thing. You should have role models, but when it becomes this thing where we compare our lives to theirs and think that, I'll never measure up, what it'll tend to do is it'll be the thief of your self-esteem, the thief of your self-worth, the thief of your confidence. And you're not going to feel confident stepping out and doing what God has called you to do because you're going to be trying to step into somebody else's shoes. Does that make sense? It's okay to admire somebody else's path, but it's not okay to walk directly in their footsteps. So, it is exhausting. And the cycle of comparison just continues on and on, because as soon as you reach good enough in whatever category it is you're comparing, suddenly you'll look around and there will be the next thing to compare yourself to that you're not going to be good enough for at that point in time. The pattern of comparison steals from our hearts, from our lives, from what God has called us to do. So we're going to look at something that Paul said in Romans chapter 12. Some of you, if you grew up in church, you've probably heard this verse. I've preached on it many times, but I want to read it to you in the NLT version because it words it a little bit differently. And this is what it says. It says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way that you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for your life, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Now, I want to pause here and take a second to look at this, okay? Because he's talking about a new way of thinking, right? Don't copy or compare the patterns of this world, okay? Because it's not going to get you anywhere, right? That's what he says not to do, right? In order to transform our thinking, we got to take our eyes off everybody else around us. He's calling us into a transformation of our state of mind, which is not something we can do on our own, right? It doesn't say transform your thinking. What does it say? Go back a slide. It doesn't say transform your thinking. It says, verse 1. What's the phrase? You can't transform, but you awake? Let God transform. Okay, this is the control issue we have. When we are caught up in comparison, it's a control issue. But when we allow God to transform our thinking, that's when true transformation can happen. There's another verse where Paul says to be filled with the Spirit. You can't fill yourself with the Spirit because you're not God. You have to be filled with the Spirit. In other words, you have to allow God to do his work in your life. Right? So allow God to transform you into a new way of thinking. See, the whole that first line is a don't, right? Don't copy the behaviors and customs of the world. Don't look around you to the horizon. Don't look around to the people to your left and to your right, but let God. Your eyes should be up. When we use the people around us as a measuring rod for how good we're doing, we miss the plans that God has for us because he has a different measurement, a different standard for your life than he does for the person next to you. And that's a good thing. He's given you unique abilities, unique experiences, a different path to walk than the person that you're looking at next to you. And if we want to follow God's will for our lives, we have to stop looking around and we have to look up. We have to allow God to transform our thinking. Right? It's a shift in focus from comparing yourself to them, to those around you, to allowing God to transform you. So, if there's a bottom line that I want you guys to get out of this, it's to choose to see yourself the way that God does. Because our ultimate issue when we compare ourselves to others is we're looking at ourselves through the lens of others. What will so-and-so think of me? If I'm being honest, when I was your age and I wanted to be the next Caleb Hutchcraft, the next basketball player, I wasn't thinking about it just because I just like to be really good. I'm kind of competitive, so there's that. But also, I wanted the affirmation of my peers cheering for me in the stands because I could steal the ball from anybody and look how talented I am, right? It's not bad to want to be talented. But when I was beating myself up from the comparison, it was because I wanted what he had. I wanted the praise. I didn't want to improve the team so much as I wanted to improve my image. Right? The real reason I wanted to be a rock star and travel around was because I thought I was it. I was God's gift to the world. Right? But God doesn't need me. In fact, God doesn't need any of you because God's God. He can do what he wants. But he wants you to be a part of his plan. He wants you to live your life within his purpose, not only because it'll be fulfilling for your life, but because it's going to bless all the other lives around you, and he's going to shine through in your weaknesses in a way that you would not be able to if you yourself achieved the level of good enough in whatever area you're searching for on your own. Something I had to discover, the humbling I had to have, was to recognize that my own aspirations are not my own. My aspirations needed to be God's aspirations for my life. What God was calling me to, the path that he had set me on. And when God has to course correct you, it's more painful. Often it's more painful when God has to shut doors to put you in a certain direction than it is if we were to just willingly walk through the ones he's opened for us. Does that make sense? When we compare, when we look around to those next to us, we miss out on God's divine appointments for our lives. We miss out on what he's doing in our lives. We're missing out on the gift that it is being a part of his plan. When we're having this pull and tug relationship with God between what we want and what he wants, there's no peace. And there is no peace in comparison, as we talked about a couple weeks ago. So, choose to see yourself the way that God does rather than through the lens of everybody else around you. A few verses later, this is what Paul says. He says, so, since we find ourselves fashioned into all these excellently formed and marvelously functioning parts in Christ's body, let's just go ahead and be what we were made to be, without enviously or pridefully comparing ourselves with each other or trying to be something that we aren't. Now, you need to know that all throughout the New Testament, there's this comparison where when God talks about the church, it's the body of believers. That's the hands and feet of Jesus. It's the body of Christ. Elsewhere, Paul is writing to the church, and he says that each one of us are different members within one body. Like, you can't live with 10 arms, right? You need a brain and a heart and blood vessels, and you need all the different parts of the body working in tandem in order for the body to function properly, right? But I know that was a really weird mental image. I'm sorry. But the reality is one body needs all these different parts in order to function the way that it needs to. And the church is God's analogy for his body. That we are the hands and feet of Jesus. Some of you are eyes, some of you are fingers, some of you are toes, some of you are hearts, some of you are brains, some of you have different skills and abilities and talents and paths that God has set you on. And if we're all working together within the body of Christ, we don't need to compare ourselves to everybody else because we have a unique function on our own. And that's what makes us so special. So don't needlessly compare yourself to those around you. It's only going to leave you and steal you of your peace. So believing in the truth of how God sees you actually has way more potential for your life. I want you to have plenty of time in group, so I'm gonna wrap this up with a couple application points. One, I want you to start by identifying what's not true in your life. Okay? In order to change the way that you think or to allow God to transform and renew your mind, you have to diagnose the lies that you are believing. What are you believing about yourself that's not true? What areas of your life leave you feeling like you're not good enough? And evaluate that. Look for the places in your life where you compare. Where are you comparing yourself to everybody else, and how is that bringing you down? How is that taking away from what God actually has for you because you're too busy at looking at everybody else around you? Okay. Secondly, you have to replace those old thoughts with the new ones. This is where the transformation happens. Like when you recognize that you are comparing yourself with somebody else in an unhealthy way, then replace those lies with God says, I'm loved. He says, I'm enough. I'm a child of the King. Right? God considers me a friend. He made me with incredible gifts. Right? Remind yourselves of those truths rather than looking around at all the things that you don't have. When you focus on what you don't have, you're missing out on what you do. And so, identify what's not true and then replace the lies you're telling yourself with the truth. So, again, my challenge is to choose to see yourself the way that God does. You're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth in your groups. So I'm going to go ahead and pray and let you guys finish this discussion there. And then we will wrap up. Next week, we're starting something new. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be really good. I hope you guys come back. You're not going to want to miss it next week. So let me pray, send you in your groups, and we'll be done for the night.